You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Hello and welcome to Force 13's 2021 Tropical Cyclone Outlook for the Northern Hemisphere, our April forecast. You may remember last year I was standing out in the Force 13 garden on a quite warm day actually. Well, this time it's quite different, it's pretty cold out there, so that's why I'm back in the studio. But I can't resist plugging just for a moment our new cameras that are launching on the Force 13 UK channel. They'll be putting out live feeds showing the local weather around these parts of the world. So that's something to look forward to on the UK and Ireland channel. A few more announcements at the end, but obviously the reason why everyone's here is to talk about the 2021 seasons that are upcoming. And we've been crunching more numbers, we've been looking at more trends, we've been looking at climatological models, we've been looking at the direction of travel, and we have rounded on some predictions for the Northern Hemisphere seasons. So, first of all, on my screen here you can see our numbers from last year and what happened. But this year, for the Atlantic then, we are looking at 16 tropical storms, 9 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes in 2021. Now let me just get up my slides here. Got to scoot over to do that. So in the Atlantic then, this year, this is what we're expecting right now. Latest trends indicating that conditions are particularly favourable for hurricanes developing in the western Atlantic and the eastern Caribbean during the late summer and fall period, as you'd expect. Current patterns also trending towards favourable conditions at sea. So what I liken this to being really is, and what I've been calling it for a while, maybe this year is what 2011 would have been to 2010. 2021 would be to 2020. So, storm tracks that are further east, further out to sea generally, but that also means, because we saw so many Gulf Coast impacts last year, that we could then see some other tracks shifting east to then cover the US East Coast. And those are some of the tracks that we're looking at possibly. Some of them that will get uncomfortably close to shore and then recurve. Other systems that could cause problems throughout the central Caribbean, the Greater Antilles, onto easternmost Cuba, as mentioned, through the Bahamas, and then on towards the US East Coast. Those are areas that we are a little bit concerned about this year. Also, you may see a few other storms that stay way out to sea, out towards the eastern Atlantic, and get a little bit lost. I don't think we'll be seeing storms doing loop-the-loops and all that, but I do think storm motion might be impeded a little bit out to sea, and we may get storms that last a little while. But in terms of significant hurricanes and major hurricane landfalls, it pretty much shouldn't be as bad as last year. I mean, it's quite probably impossible considering the season that we did just have. So the US East Coast, to a lesser extent the western Gulf Coast as well, could see significant landfalling hurricanes. In the Gulf itself, we're not sold on there being major impacts just yet. It's most likely that we will see maybe several weaker hurricanes of category 1 and 2 intensity striking Texas, and Louisiana and off over towards the Florida Panhandle, and indeed even the western coast of Florida further south as well. We're talking about Naples down to Collier County. On the east coast as well, Florida could get a few impacts there. We'll talk about that in just a moment. So in terms of the season itself, its composition, we're expecting it to start quietly, which is interesting. But by the time we get to August, we're expecting 4 storms, September another 4, October 2, and November 1, which those numbers just hedging slightly above the average. No areas have been identified as being a particular severe risk of major hurricane landfall so far. However, one could still occur anywhere in the basin, and that's why everyone should of course prepare. It only takes one storm to be a real big issue. Thinking about the Caribbean Sea, the proper tropical areas down there, you know, the channel from the Lesser Antilles right the way through to the Yucatan Peninsula, it's unlikely that we will see significant hurricane activity there, but there is some outside chances from some of the analogues we've been looking at that we could get strong storms early or late in the season. It's looking like in the mid-peak of the season the Caribbean Sea will be fairly quiet and suppressed. We're probably going to get quite a lot of systems forming in the Bay of Campeche on our left-hand side, and then moving northwards through up into the coast of Tamaulipas in Mexico or into Texas. Now, most occasions storms don't have much time to intensify in that situation, one or two notable exceptions of course, so we're probably talking about one or two weaker hurricane landfalls, much like what we saw with Hannah last year. Also comparing to other storms such as Isaias perhaps, possibly seeing tracks like that, but maybe stronger systems that do that. Isaias of course weakened remarkably as it was moving through the Bahamas. Itself could have been much stronger. The East Coast should be watching out for potential impacts. Let me just show you 2020. So this was last year's forecasted probabilities for tropical storm conditions. You saw Texas lit up there, Louisiana, a notable gap there towards the Texas border, which is where Laura and Delta made landfall. And then looking towards the right there, the Florida East Coast was in the darker shades of green. Didn't fully verify really, the Outer Banks had the highest chances. But take a look at 2021. I want you to look at the Northeast. The northeastern part of the US in 2021, particularly New Jersey, Delaware, into the Chesapeake Bay, higher chances than what we saw last year for tropical storm impacts in 2021. And right up there towards Massachusetts, I think that's the 15% gradient, can't quite tell on the graphics there. But again, the Outer Banks, higher chances once again, as you'd expect, it does stick out. But notably, towards the south, Florida, southwestern Florida, you can see there 50% just nudging it into the orange zone there. So generally, considering last year, slightly less confidence in tropical storm impacts for the United States and therefore hurricane impacts, but still a few areas that have at least a half chance of seeing something. We're also looking at Louisiana, the southeastern part of Louisiana actually, for potential more hurricane landfalls. Again, we're probably looking at weaker ones, but obviously you can never rule out the strong ones, and that extends that risk into Mississippi as well. Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, lesser chances around that area until you get to the Big Bend, and you can see there darker greens. And also the eastern part of Florida, you can see a very dark shade, so potential for tropical storm impacts here. Florida will probably get hit mostly by tropical storms, but you can't rule out a significant hurricane impact. Indeed, one of the analogues for this year is 1960, and we know what happened in that year. Hurricane Donna moved in through the Florida Keys and up towards the western coast as a Category 4 and then struck the rest of the US East Coast. But that's just one example, and for that example there's about 10 more where nothing like that happened. Let's take a look at the next graphic then. This is the hurricane chances, and as you can see, much higher chances for the Outer Banks. I think we will be getting a lot of systems that will be skirting the coast, potentially very strong ones that get uncomfortably close to shore, as I said earlier. You can see there's that 40% chance for some of those counties on the Outer Banks. Further south, Georgia, that's looking quite clear. Southern part of South Carolina, and then into Florida, you've got general chances again. Southwestern part of Florida has the highest chances of hurricane conditions this year, along with the westernmost part of the Panhandle. Also, the mouth of the Mississippi River region too is probably going to sustain some kind of impact this year. Let me just point out one more thing. Further north, New Jersey again, look, up above the 5% range, which I don't think happened last year. So that's again something to watch out for either a storm running up the coast like an Irene, and maybe even further south, something like an Isabel could occur this year at a worst case scenario. Of course, those two storms were fairly bad. Well, let's take a look at what we had for Mexico last year. You can see it here. This covers both the Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific. It had, the Yucatan was quite hot there. A lot of storms made landfall on the tip of the peninsula last year, so the chances should have been higher there. But it got Cristobal there. You can see the orange zone. And on the western part of Mexico, a lot of areas that were going to get storm impacts. Which sort of half verified. But let's take a look at this year, and this is what we have for the whole of North America this time. So all of the Caribbean region there, you can see how that's been shaded in, and we've simplified the states this time, and even Atlantic Canada, some small chances of tropical storm conditions, as there is every year. But looking at those hotspots then, where we're looking at central Cuba, looking on towards the eastern part, storms approaching from the east, and then moving curving probably towards the north by the time it reaches the island of Cuba. The central part of the Bahamas, particularly the areas on the eastern sides that stick out to sea a little bit more, those have high chances. We're probably going to see one or multiple tropical storms moving through the Windward Islands and the Leeward Islands. Unlikely that we'll see significant hurricanes through the Windward Islands, a little bit higher chance for the Leewards. Mexico itself, Veracruz, we're probably going to get a few landfalls there again from weaker systems again that form in the Bay of Campeche or move over the Yucatan and get disrupted. And also we're looking there at Honduras, a fairly low chance there, but obviously after last year can't take too many chances with that at all. But generally we are expecting a majority of hurricanes, certainly the strongest ones, to remain out at sea. Now you can see over there on the Pacific side again there, Mexico, the western parts, the areas that stick out the most really, they have the highest chances. Also Guerrero province, I think that is there, in the orange as well, so a higher chance there from maybe early season activity. So let's take a look at those Pacific numbers. This year we are expecting 15 hurricanes, we are expecting 15 tropical storms, 8 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes this year in the Eastern Pacific. We're probably not going to get a Category 5, which is good news. And let's take a look at the key messages actually for the Eastern Pacific. So, latest trends indicating 3 particular storm tracking patterns. So the first one you've got over there on the right hand side is the storm tracks that begin out over in the easternmost East Pacific and then develop and then turn towards the north there. We're looking particularly at the Gulf of California this year for potential tropical cyclone impacts and the coasts surrounding it on either side. So Baja California Sur and Mexico, the western coast up to Sinaloa. And then you've got the more traditional tracks, the ones that start out to sea and stay out to sea the whole way, moving up towards the west-northwest/northwest. That's the most common track style. And towards the south there, storms that might form at a lower latitude and stay there and become significant hurricanes quite possibly. We may get some long-lasting systems in the Eastern Pacific this year that make it into the Central Pacific or maybe even into the Western Pacific this year. However, the threat to the Hawaiian Islands at least isn't particularly high, not above normal. So apart from that, let's see, what else did we have there? I think that's all of it. The Eastern Pacific, about an average season probably. We're expecting the season really to... Actually, we're looking at a fairly more active end compared to the beginning. So we're expecting the beginning parts of the season to be a little bit below average, and then it will pipe up a little bit more September through November. That's our best estimate at the moment, but it is pretty close, and that could change. Let's take a look at the Western Pacific. So this year we are expecting, and bearing in mind that this was filmed on April 12th and there is a system brewing in the Western Pacific that's probably going to become a significant typhoon. That's going to be counted in the yet to come numbers. So we're expecting 26 more storms to go along with Tianjin 1W to make 27. We are expecting 15 typhoons, and we are expecting 9 major typhoons this year in 2021. We are also expecting 2 Category 5s somewhere in the basin this year. Pretty normal, but there you go, that's what we're saying right now. So another near average season expected for the Western Pacific. The average is 27, but of course many typhoons could still become intense, and we are currently forecasting 2 Category 5 super typhoons. Samar, southern Luzon and northern Luzon are the biggest typhoon threats this year in the Philippines. We're expecting storms that form in the Philippine Sea, as we can see on that example there, and passing through much like some of those storms did last year, and then moving on into the South China Sea. And then we're also looking at locations in China from Hainan to Guangdong under particular typhoon at risk this year, and to an extent stretching round towards Shanghai as well. So again, we've got 3 predominant tracks there. The first one obviously will deliver most of that threat to China and the Philippines and northern Vietnam, which could get more problems up there. Then you've got further north, much uncertainty. It's probably the most uncertain part of the entire forecast today around the world. We're not really sure what's going to happen up there, whether storms are going to propel themselves into Taiwan, which has a high chance of storm conditions, whether they'll recurve a little bit and then strike the Japanese islands, eastern China, Korea, or recurve completely and go straight through Japan, or storms, and possibly an and as well as an or, storms that form closer to the Mariana Islands, and then we're expecting them to make a rather pronounced sharp turn towards the northeast as they recurve later in the season. So, Vietnam. There may be 1 or 2 typhoon impacts this year. We're not expecting anything on the scale of last year's impacts. Central Vietnam really got the worst of it in 2020. I would be surprised if there's more than 1 substantial impact there this year. And the Mariana Islands may sustain a typhoon impact this year, but the risk is no greater than average. So we're expecting, oh yes, I forgot to mention, in the Western Pacific, we're probably, the way it's going, we're probably going to have a strong start very soon, and then it will have a bit of a break, possibly a long break lasting a month or so in June or July, much like what we had last year. And then really getting going again in August. We're expecting only 1 storm in June. That's where we think the break's going to be. Then 4 in July, and then 6 in August is what our current expectations are, followed by another 6 in September. So that's our general consensus on that, but of course it's not ever set in stone, and these are just our best estimates based on what we already know. So let's take a look at the, well, there you can see the wind probabilities again, and that's interesting. Sorry, this is last year. You can see there actually, compared to last year, the central part of Luzon, less chance. Palawan, a less chance there as well. Vietnam actually had higher chances down there towards the middle part, so that verified last year. And then further north along the Chinese coast and Taiwan, pretty much. Japan had a lot of red zones. Korea was probably the one that was really underestimated last year. But looking at this year, and you can see that now, we're looking further north in Vietnam, a particularly concentrated area towards the central north part of Vietnam, as well as those areas from Hainan to the eastern coast of China, as we mentioned. Taiwan is looking pretty red there on that graphic. The Philippines, not as much. Generally, overall, but there are a few areas that specific areas that have elevated risks, such as Samar and Masbate. Japan, lesser chances. It's going to be along the south coast, skimming along there, and the western part of Kyushu always sticks out, always gets significant typhoon impacts. It would be no surprise to see it again this year. The southern part of South Korea, high chances there, fairly. But looking further north as well, extending even into North Korea, some high chances up there as well, and onwards towards the north there. Okay, so let's take a look at the Indian Ocean finally, and this is what our forecast is for the North Indian Ocean this year. We are expecting 6 tropical storms, 2 cyclones of Category 1 strength or higher, and 1 major cyclone of Category 3 or higher this year. and a few interesting points to make on this one, because there's not that many lines of significant cyclone tracks, and they're not very long. So what we're expecting really, we're probably going to get one or two fairly weak storms in the first part of the season, May/June/July, maybe into July, a very low chance. But we're probably going to get a weaker kind of tropical storm or two that moves through the Bay of Bengal region and possibly towards Myanmar as well. Now the thing is with these systems, they can be often fairly weak, but they usually end up being very wet. So those are systems that can still cause severe damage, even though it's not the likes of an Amphan that we saw last year. It doesn't look like we're going to get one of those in the early part of this season. Later on, we're looking towards the other parts of the basin. Now, October, that's going to be the peak month this season probably for the Indian Ocean. That's what all our indications are showing. We're expecting 1.5 storms is what our statistics say, climatologically speaking, in October. So let's call that 2, maybe 3, and then you've got November, December, which will probably have 1 each. But October, we're looking at the main area of risk we're looking at now is a bit further south than what we saw last year. We're looking at the areas around Andhra Pradesh in India and possibly even 1 or 2 cyclone risks further south, maybe even for Sri Lanka and into Tamil Nadu in southern India. The threat further north, places like Odisha, a little bit less likely, and the Bengal region for strong storms, probably much less than usual. Western coast, up towards Gujarat, possibly another system there this year. Not sure how severe it might be, but that's something to look out for. That's what we're indicating here. But the rest of Western India, probably not much going on. It's very rare that we do see systems impacting that area. And then also just for the Arabian coast there as well, we could see systems affecting that area probably in the early part of the season, May, June, and then that would be sort of east of Salalah in Oman, quite a bit east of there actually, extending about halfway along the coast there up to the tip of that peninsula. So those are what we expect for that in the Indian Ocean. Fairly low confidence on that Western Indian side of things. But there we have it, that's what we expect this year. Let me just actually show you those chances again for the Indian region, so you can see there the highest chances actually for tropical storm conditions are the Bengal region, but likely to be weaker systems. As I mentioned, it would be more of a rain threat from storms in that area if they are, as we expect, to be much weaker. So that is all of our predictions for 2021 so far. Not sure how polished this has been, but I did my best on that one. And we will have another forecast on May the 31st in the build-up to the start of the Atlantic hurricane season once again, like we did last year. Whilst I've got you, I'd like to remind you of a few updates that are happening on Force 13 at the moment. As I mentioned at the start, our cameras are looking out there eagle-eyed at the UK skies for the UK and Ireland channel, which is restarting again now with a new team. We've also got a team in place for Force 13 Europe, which has now launched as well, Force 13 EU. They'll be launching on YouTube soon, I believe. They're already on Twitter, you can find them on there. And of course our other regional channels still going along as well, Force 13 US and Caribbean, as well as Force 13 Australia and Oceania, and Force 13 Philippines on Facebook. So we're getting pretty much the whole world covered, it would seem. And of course this is our 10th year of operation. It's remarkable to think about that we've been going nearly for 10 years now. By November the 30th, that is when our birthday is, and that is when we're going to have, I don't know what we're going to do, massive parties probably for the end of hurricane season and our 10th birthday, and we'll have to think of some very special things to do for that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching. I'm sure we'll be live sooner than you may know, sooner than I may know even, and tropical weather bulletins will be on the way back fairly soon as well. I know people are waiting for that. And then you'll be in the season once they start up. And of course, if anything happens in the intervening period, we'll be there with updates for the foreseeable. Thank you.